Your wife's still alive. 4 words. That's all it took to shatter Carmine Ferraro's world. He stood frozen at Greenwood Cemetery, rain dripping down his black coat, when the voice cut through the silence behind him. Soft, young, but sharp as a blade, he turned. A boy, no older than 10, stood just beyond the mourners, soaked, thin, eyes too old for his face. Carmine's men moved to block him. But Carmine raised a hand. Let him speak. The boy didn't flinch. I saw her. The night of the storm. They pulled her from the water. She was alive, bleeding, screaming your name. They dragged her into a van. Carmine's jaw tightened. His voice dropped to ice. Kid, my wife drowned a year ago. We searched for weeks. There were no survivors. The boy stepped closer. She had a scar, long one, down her left arm, and short auburn hair. She fought them. Hard. Carmine's blood ran cold. That scar was Rosalie's darkest secret, self-inflicted during her years in foster care, hidden beneath tattooed roses. No one knew about it. No one except him. He'd kissed that scar every night for 4 years. What else? He demanded. A necklace, gold heart pendant, 2 letters, C and R. The world tilted. That pendant was his wedding gift to her, custom designed, their initials intertwined. He'd never told a soul about it. It had never left her neck. The boy reached into his jacket and pulled out a white handkerchief, soaked and frayed, trimmed with lace. 1 letter remained visible, embroidered in silver thread. R. Carmine's hand trembled as he took it. Where? Behind the old cannery on Pier 17. I watched from behind the fence. They stopped the van there. A man with a fake arm gave the orders. Military type, gray beard, long coat. He said, "Move her before anyone sees." Carmine stared at the boy. Those eyes held no lies, only truth and desperation. What's your name? Ethan. Why now? Why wait a year? Because no one believed me. I told a cop once. He laughed, called me a liar, but I'm not lying. I saw everything. Bruno leaned in. Boss, we need to move. Reporters. Carmine didn't hear him. He was staring at the handkerchief, memories crashing through him. Rosalie's laugh, her strength, the way she'd survived hell before he ever found her. Get the car. Boss, now. The black SUV rolled up. Carmine opened the door and looked at Ethan. Get in. The boy's eyes widened. You believe me? Carmine's voice was quiet. Dangerous. I believe you enough to find out. And if you're right, I'm bringing her back. If you're wrong, pray I never see you again. Ethan climbed in without hesitation. As the car pulled away, a man in a gray raincoat lowered his binoculars from behind a marble angel. He tapped a device in his pocket. They've made contact. Proceed to phase 2. Inside the SUV, Carmine gripped the handkerchief like a lifeline. For the first time in a year, hope clawed its way back into his chest. And nothing had ever terrified him more. If this satisfies your soul, smash that like button. Share it with someone who needs this story. And subscribe, because you don't want to miss what comes next. The real question is, if Rosalie survived that night, what kind of hell has she been trapped in for 12 long months? The SUV glided through the rain-soaked streets of Brooklyn. Inside, the silence was heavy as lead. Carmine sat across from Ethan, his gray eyes never leaving the boy. Bruno drove, occasionally glancing into the rearview mirror. The boy was curled into the corner of the leather seat, rainwater still dripping from his messy brown hair onto the shoulders of his torn jacket. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't afraid. He was simply waiting in silence. Carmine spoke first. Where do you live? Ethan shrugged. Nowhere fixed. Sometimes under bridges. Sometimes behind dumpsters at the docks. In winter, I found an abandoned parking garage in Red Hook. Where are your parents? My mom died 3 years ago. Drug overdose. I came home from school and found her on the kitchen floor. Her lips were purple. Her eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling. I called 911, but they came too late. Ethan's voice didn't shake, didn't falter. He spoke as if he were reading a weather report. That calmness told Carmine the pain had been buried so deep it could no longer be touched. And your father? I don't know. My mom never talked about him. Maybe she didn't know either. After my mom died, they sent me to St. Augustine Orphanage in Queens. I stayed there 8 months, and then I ran away. Why did you run? Ethan was silent for a moment. Then he pulled up his sleeve, revealing a bruise that had already turned yellow on his forearm. Because there are adults who shouldn't be near children. Carmine understood. He didn't ask more. He had seen enough wounds like that on Rosalie's body to know some stories didn't need words. So you've been on your own since you were 7 years old. I can take care of myself. I know where to find leftover food. I know safe places to sleep. I know how to become invisible. When no one sees you, no one can hurt you. Carmine nodded slowly. That night at the docks, what were you doing? I was looking for shelter from the rain. The storm was too big. I ran behind the abandoned canning factory because there was a roof. I was curled up behind a stack of wooden crates when I heard a vehicle. A white truck stopped. Then they opened the back door and dragged her out. She tried to fight, but there were too many of them. 4 men. One of them had a prosthetic arm. He was the one giving orders. And you didn't run. I was scared. But I was curious too. I hid behind a fence and looked through a gap. She saw me. Right when they were pulling her toward the back door of the factory, she turned her head and looked straight at me. I thought she would scream, would point at me. But she didn't. She just looked, like she was trying to memorize my face, like she knew one day I would tell this story. Carmine felt his chest tighten. That was Rosalie, always thinking one step ahead, always searching for a way to survive even in despair. That handkerchief, where did you get it? The next morning I came back. I wanted to see if there were any clues. I found it on the ground near where they stopped the truck. It must have fallen when they dragged her away. I kept it ever since. I didn't know how important it was until I saw her picture in the newspaper. Carmine turned to Bruno. Give me the phone. Bruno handed over the encrypted phone. Carmine dialed and waited. 2 rings. Pietro here. The voice came with constant keyboard tapping. I need you to work. Right now. Pietro's tone sharpened. What is it, boss? Rosalie might still be alive. Silence stretched for 3 seconds. Then the typing doubled in speed. I'm listening. I need you to check every security camera within a 5-mile radius around the old canning factory in Red Hook, the night of March 17th last year. Look for a white truck, 4 men, one with a military-style prosthetic arm. I need to know where they went after that. Understood. Give me a few hours. No. You have until morning. And Pietro, don't tell anyone. Not even the underbosses. You think there's a mole. I don't suspect anyone, but I don't trust anyone either. Not until I bring my wife home. Carmine ended the call and looked at Ethan. The boy was studying him with unusually mature brown eyes. Are you really a Mafia boss? Carmine didn't answer. He simply looked at the boy with an unreadable gaze. Aren't you scared? Ethan shook his head. I've lived on the streets for 3 years. I've met all kinds of monsters. You're not like them. Why? Because your eyes hurt when I mentioned her. Real monsters don't feel pain. Carmine turned to look out the window. The rain kept falling. The city kept moving. But inside him, something was waking up. Something he thought had died with Rosalie a year ago. Where are we going? Ethan asked. To my home. You'll stay there until this is over. And after that? Carmine looked at the boy. We'll figure it out later. The SUV turned onto the road leading to Long Island, where the Ferraro estate stood massive in the darkness, and somewhere in the shadows, other eyes were still watching. The iron gates of the Ferraro estate opened into the night. The SUV glided along the white gravel driveway, ancient oak trees standing motionless on both sides beneath the rain. Ethan stared through the window, his eyes widening at the massive mansion rising before him. Warm yellow light spilled from the tall glass windows, casting hazy reflections across the wet courtyard. He had never seen a house this large. It looked like a castle from the books he used to read at the public library, on the days he slipped inside just to escape the cold. The car stopped at the front entrance. Bruno stepped out and Carmine followed, guiding Ethan with him. The rain had eased, leaving only fine droplets drifting through the cold air. The heavy oak doors opened, and a woman came forward to greet them. She was about 60 years old, her silver hair neatly pinned up, dressed in elegant black. Her face was stern, but her dark eyes flickered with concern when she saw Carmine. You're home, she said, her voice carrying a distinct Italian cadence. Why didn't you call first? Then her gaze settled on Ethan. Who is this? Mom, this is Ethan, Carmine said briefly. He'll be staying here for a while. Teresa Ferraro frowned but didn't ask anything further. She had lived long enough in this world to know that some questions shouldn't be asked in front of outsiders. She nodded and stepped aside. Come in. The child looks like he's about to freeze. Inside, The mansion was warm and quiet. Polished marble floors reflected the glow of crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Ethan stood hunched in the foyer, water still dripping from his soaked clothes onto the floor. He tried to make himself as small as possible, as if afraid he might stain something. Teresa studied him, her gaze softening slightly. "Maria," she called. A middle-aged woman in a housekeeper's uniform appeared from the hallway. "Prepare a bath and clean clothes for this child. Then get him something hot to eat." "Yes, ma'am." Ethan looked at Carmine, uncertain. "Go with Maria," Carmine said. "Wash up. Eat. Rest. We'll talk later." The boy nodded and quietly followed the housekeeper. When Ethan disappeared beyond the staircase, Teresa turned to her son. She noticed the white handkerchief in his hand and her eyes froze. "What are you holding?" Carmine handed it to her. Teresa took it with trembling fingers. She unfolded it, tracing the lace trim, the silver-embroidered letter R, and then she recognized it. Her face drained of color. "This is," she said, her voice catching. "I gave this to Rosalie, the first day she came home as my daughter-in-law. I told her it was a Ferraro tradition. Every bride receives a handkerchief embroidered with the first letter of her name." Carmine nodded. "I know. Rosalie always kept it in her coat pocket. I once asked why she didn't put it somewhere safe. She said it was the first thing that made her feel like she belonged to a family." Teresa looked at her son, tears streaming down her lined cheeks. "Where did this come from?" The boy found it. "The night Rosalie disappeared." "Mom, I think my wife is still alive." Teresa raised a hand to her mouth. She stood there for a long moment, her shoulders trembling as she fought back a sob. Then she took a deep breath and lifted her head. Her eyes were no longer filled with tears, but ignited with a familiar fire. The fire of a mother, of a woman who had watched her husband be assassinated, who had raised her son alone into the head of an empire, who had survived every war in this underworld. "Then bring her home," she said, her voice hard as steel. "Even if you have to burn this entire city down." Carmine met his mother's gaze and nodded. Meanwhile, upstairs, Ethan sat in a bathtub filled with hot water. He couldn't remember the last time he had bathed in heat like this. Maybe when his mother was still alive. Steam rose, fogging the large mirror on the wall. He looked down at his hands, the calluses from 3 years on the street slowly softening in the warmth. Maria had left clean clothes on the shelf, a soft cotton set of pajamas, probably belonging to someone much bigger than him, but they were clean, and dry, and warm. That was all that mattered. After the bath, Ethan was led down to the kitchen. The room was spacious, with gleaming walnut cabinets and granite countertops. Maria placed before him a bowl of steaming chicken soup, several slices of buttered toast, and a glass of warm milk. Ethan stared at the food as if it were a dream. He ate slowly, careful not to swallow too fast, careful not to reveal that this was his first full meal in weeks. From the kitchen doorway, Teresa watched. She watched the way he ate, the way he held his spoon cautiously as if someone might snatch it away, the way his eyes darted around in wary reflexes like a wild creature accustomed to danger, and something inside her softened. This boy had brought hope back to her son. Whatever came next, she wouldn't let him be abandoned again. 3 a.m. Carmine descended the staircase, leading to the basement of the estate. This wasn't a wine cellar or an entertainment room like in other wealthy homes. This was the nerve center of the Ferraro Empire. The room was vast, its concrete walls 1/2 meter thick, fully soundproofed, equipped with computer systems more advanced than those used by some intelligence agencies. And seated at the heart of that maze of screens was Pietro Gallo. The thin hacker with long hair tied back was typing like a madman, 4 monitors glowing in front of him, his 5th cup of coffee of the night sitting cold at his side. When he heard Carmine's footsteps, Pietro didn't turn around. "You came at the right time, boss. I just found something." Carmine stood behind him, staring at the screens. "Show me." Pietro pulled a video window onto the main monitor. Grainy black and white footage from a high angle. "This is an ATM camera from First National Bank on Van Brunt Street, about 200 meters from the canning factory. The night of March 17th last year, 2:47 in the morning. The video played, an empty street corner soaked in rain. Then a white truck entered the frame, moving slowly. No logo, no readable license plate. Just an ordinary white truck, like thousands of others on New York streets. But Pietro paused the footage and zoomed in. "Look here. The back of the truck. The door is slightly open. In that gap, you can see a figure. Short hair, light-colored. Carmine leaned closer, eyes narrowing. Can you enhance it more? The quality is too low, but I ran it through an image enhancement algorithm. Pietro tapped a few keys, and the image sharpened slightly. Still blurred, but enough to make out the contours of a woman's face. Her mouth open as if screaming. An arm with a long mark running down it. "Rosalie," Carmine whispered, his voice rough. "That's her," Pietro nodded. "I think so too. But there's more. Keep watching." The video continued. The truck disappeared from view. Seconds later, a black SUV appeared, following the same direction, then a gray sedan. All three vehicles moved at equal intervals, like an escort. Pietro switched to another screen. I tracked them through 23 different cameras. Traffic cameras, store cameras, private security systems. They went through Red Hook, through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel, into Manhattan, then vanished in Midtown. Vanished. They entered an underground parking garage on 54th Street. No cameras inside, and no record of those three vehicles ever leaving. Carmine was silent for a moment, meaning they switched vehicles there. Pietro nodded. Exactly. This wasn't a random kidnapping, boss. They had a plan. Resources. Cover. 3 vehicles, at least 8 to 10 people. A route designed to avoid cameras. This is how professional organizations operate. Military, or some kind of agency. I'm not sure yet, but I found this. Pietro pulled up another image. This is footage from a convenience store camera near the parking garage. It caught a man stepping out of the black SUV, tall, gray beard, long coat, and his left arm was unnaturally stiff. Carmine stared at the image. Him. The boy described him exactly. Pietro nodded. I'm running facial recognition across every database I have access to, including some I technically don't anymore. It'll take a few hours. Anything else? Pietro hesitated for a second. There's one more thing, but you won't like it. Say it. I rechecked Rosalie's case file. The official report says the boat hit a storm, capsized, no body recovered. But I hacked the Coast Guard system and found the original report before it was altered. The original report states they found debris from the boat, but no signs of impact with rocks or any object. The boat wasn't sunk by a storm, boss. It was sabotaged. Someone drilled holes in the hull. Carmine stood frozen, his fist clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. Who altered the report? I'm tracing it back, but the trail leads to an IP address belonging to a private security firm called Sentinel Security. Headquarters in Midtown Manhattan. Sentinel Security. Carmine repeated the name as if carving it into his memory. Find everything about that company. Who owns it? Who runs it? Who they work with? And find out if that man with the prosthetic arm is connected. Pietro was already typing before Carmine finished speaking. You'll have answers by noon tomorrow. Carmine turned toward the stairs, then stopped. Pietro. Yes, boss. Good work. Pietro didn't reply, but a small smile flickered across the hacker's lips. It was the rarest praise Carmine Ferraro ever gave anyone, and it meant things were about to become very, very dangerous. 11 o'clock the next morning. Carmine was sitting in his study when Pietro called. I found him, boss. Come down to the basement. Carmine reached the basement in under 2 minutes. Pietro had everything ready on the largest screen. The hacker looked like he hadn't slept a single minute since the night before. Eyes bloodshot, beard rough and uneven. But his voice was clear to the point of being chilling. Frederick Shaw, Pietro said, pointing at the image on the screen. A man around 60 years old, angular features, neatly trimmed gray beard, ice-cold blue eyes. This photo is from a military file. Former United States Army colonel, served 23 years, commanded special operations units in Iraq and Afghanistan. Carmine stared at the image. The face matched Ethan's description, and the convenience store camera footage, perfectly. The prosthetic arm. Lost his left arm in an IED explosion in Fallujah in 2007, replaced with a high-tech prosthetic arm provided by the military. But here's the interesting part. Pietro pulled up a series of documents. Shaw was discharged from the Army in 2012. Official reason was early retirement due to health issues. But I dug up a classified internal report. He was investigated for suspected abuse of detainees and trafficking intelligence to private contractors. The case was buried because it implicated several high-ranking Pentagon officials. Shaw was quietly forced into retirement instead of facing a court-martial. What did he do after that? He founded Sentinel Security in 2013. On paper, it's a private security firm providing protection services for corporations and high-profile individuals. But I went deeper and found a network of subsidiaries, shell companies, offshore accounts. Sentinel is just the surface. Underneath, Shaw runs a covert operation. What kind? Pietro paused for a second, choosing his words. Human trafficking, boss. Mostly women and children. They target people no one notices when they disappear. The homeless. Illegal immigrants. People with no families. But recently, they upgraded. They started targeting higher value individuals. People with rare biological traits, special blood types, exceptional cellular regeneration, survivors of serious illnesses. Carmine felt his blood turn to ice. Rosalie had been diagnosed with early-stage breast cancer. She had successfully completed chemotherapy 2 years before she disappeared. Doctors had said her body showed extraordinary recovery ability. They targeted my wife because she survived cancer. Pietro nodded slowly. I believe so. They don't kidnap randomly. They research their targets. They know exactly who they want. And they have insiders in the medical system feeding them information. Carmine stood motionless. His jaw clenched so tightly the muscles at his temples stood out. Then a memory from 3 years ago crashed over him like a wave. Newark Port. A September night. Bruno had received a tip about a suspicious container moving through Ferraro-controlled territory. Carmine had gone to inspect it himself. When they broke the lock, inside were 17 women. Chained, gagged, caged like animals. Some had already suffocated to death. The survivors looked at him with hollow eyes, as if their souls had left long ago. Carmine wasn't a good man. He knew that. He had killed, smuggled, destroyed the lives of enemies, but there were lines that even demons didn't cross. That night, he ordered the women rescued, taken somewhere safe, and burned the entire shipment. $20 million turned to ash. He didn't care who was behind it. He didn't hunt them down. He sent a message that anyone trafficking humans through Ferraro territory would pay the price. Now he understood. Pietro, tell me, that container 3 years ago, was it connected to Shaw? Pietro typed a few keys and pulled up another file. I checked. That shipment belonged to a transport company that was a Sentinel subsidiary. You didn't just burn Shaw's cargo, boss. You cost him contracts with several major European clients. Total losses were estimated at over $20 million in goods and around $50 million in future contracts. Shaw has been quietly watching you ever since. He knows who you are. He knows who Rosalie is. He waited for the right moment, and when Rosalie went out to sea that stormy night with a reduced security detail, he struck. Carmine said nothing. He simply stood there, staring at Frederick Shaw's face on the screen. 3 years. Shaw had waited 3 years for revenge, and he hadn't targeted Carmine. He had targeted Rosalie, the one thing Carmine loved more than his own life. Where is he? I haven't pinpointed his exact location, but I know Sentinel's headquarters is in Midtown Manhattan. 42nd floor, Lexington Tower. Then tonight, Carmine said, his voice frighteningly calm, we pay a visit. 11 o'clock at night. Lexington Tower rose over Midtown Manhattan. 48 floors of glass and steel reflecting the city lights. The 42nd floor was completely dark. According to the schedule Pietro had hacked, Sentinel staff left the office at 7 in the evening. Night security consisted of 4 guards, 2 in the lobby, 2 patrolling the floors. The security system was advanced, but it wasn't invincible. Nothing was invincible to Pietro Gallo. Carmine sat in an SUV parked 2 blocks away, headset tight against his ears, monitoring every movement through a laptop screen. Bruno led the 4-man team, all dressed in black, masked, moving like ghosts through the rear entrance of the building. Pietro was in the estate basement, his voice coming through the headset. Lobby cameras are looped. You have 9 minutes before the patrol returns. The service elevator is ready. Understood, Bruno replied shortly. The team moved quickly through the building's kitchen corridor and into the service elevator. The doors closed, and the cabin began to rise, 42 floors in silence. When the doors opened, they faced a long hallway carpeted in gray, frosted glass doors lining both sides bearing the Sentinel security logo, an eagle with wings spread over a steel shield. Pietro, main door, Bruno said. Opening now. The electronic lock clicked, and the light switched from red to green. Bruno pushed the door, and the team flooded inside. The Sentinel office was wide and modern, desks neatly arranged, computer screens powered down, not a soul in sight. But Bruno ignored this area. He headed straight to the back of the office, where a steel door without a handle stood. This is it. The archive room. Pietro, what does this door need? Biometrics, fingerprint and retinal scan. Give me 30 seconds. Bruno waited, gun in hand, eyes sweeping the surrounding darkness. 30 seconds felt like 30 years. Then the steel door slid aside with a soft hiss. Inside was a smaller room, walls lined with metal filing cabinets and a large server unit in the corner. Bruno signaled 2 men to guard the door. Then he and the remaining one began searching. He opened the first drawer. Files. Hundreds of files. Each contained a photograph, personal information, and notes written in coded numbers. Bruno pulled one out. A young woman, maybe in her early 20s, black hair, brown eyes. Beneath the photo were cold lines of text. Subject 072. Blood type O negative. Status processed. Last location, Facility Gamma. Bruno flipped to another file. A 16-year-old girl. Subject 093. Status transferred. Recipient Client Bravo. Nausea rose in his throat. This wasn't just human trafficking. This was an industrialized system of kidnapping and selling people like merchandise. Each victim numbered, categorized, priced. Pietro, I need you connected to the server here. I'm plugging in the device. Bruno inserted a small USB into the server port. Seconds later, Pietro's voice came through. Connected. My God, the data is massive. Thousands of records. Downloading now. Find Rosalie, Bruno said, tension tight in his voice. Rosalie Ferraro. Silence stretched for a few seconds. Then Pietro drew in a sharp breath. Found her. Subject 127. Rosalie Ferraro. 27 years old. Blood type AB negative. Medical history, early-stage breast cancer in remission. High cellular regeneration capacity. Status under experimentation. Location facility Delta. Carmine heard everything through the headset. His voice came through, cold and slow. Where is facility Delta? I'm searching. The data is encrypted in multiple layers. I need more time. Download everything. Carmine ordered. We'll decrypt it later. Bruno, get out of there. The moment Bruno pulled the USB free, the alarm screamed through the darkness. Red lights flashed across the office. Someone had triggered the backup system. Pietro shouted through the headset. They know you're there. Security is heading up the elevators. Take the fire stairs. Now. Bruno and the team burst out of the archive room. They ran through the office, kicked open the emergency exit, and charged down the stairwell. Footsteps echoed through the concrete shaft. Above them, shouts and pursuit. 20 floors. 15 floors. 10 floors. A gunshot rang out. Bruno felt a tearing pain rip through his left shoulder. He stumbled but didn't stop. Blood began to soak through the black fabric. Bruno's hit. One of the men shouted. Keep moving! Bruno roared. Don't stop for me. 5 floors. 3 floors. Ground level. They smashed through the exit door and spilled into the alley behind the building. A second SUV was waiting. Engine roaring. They jumped in, and the vehicle tore away before the doors fully closed. Behind them, the alarm continued to wail through the Manhattan night. But in their possession was a USB containing thousands of files. And one name. Facility Delta. 4 a.m. The Ferraro estate lay submerged in darkness, except for the faint glow spilling from the basement. Bruno was having his shoulder wound treated by the family's private doctor in the living room. The bullet already removed, missing bone and artery, but he would need at least a week of rest. Carmine wasn't with Bruno. He was downstairs with Pietro, his eyes locked onto the computer screens. Pietro had finished decrypting most of the data from the USB. Thousands of files filled the monitors, each one a stolen life. A human being reduced to merchandise. But Carmine cared about only one file. Here it is, Pietro said, his voice unusually low. Rosalie's complete file. Boss, I think you should sit down. Carmine didn't sit. He stood motionless, one hand gripping the back of Pietro's chair, his eyes scanning every line on the screen. Subject 127. Rosalie Ferraro, maiden name Thorne, 27 years old. Blood type AB negative. Medical history early-stage breast cancer. Fully in remission after chemotherapy. Exceptional cellular regeneration capacity. Value high. Intake date March 18th. Then the next line struck Carmine like a hammer blow. Special note subject was discovered to be 8 weeks pregnant at the time of intake. Pregnancy was terminated on March 25th to optimize the stem cell harvesting process. Carmine couldn't breathe. The world around him stopped moving. Sound vanished. Light dimmed. Only those words remained, burning into his mind like wounds that would never heal. Pregnant. Rosalie had been pregnant when she was taken. 8 weeks. His child. The child he hadn't even known existed. Pregnancy terminated. They had killed his child. They had killed his child to harvest stem cells. "Boss," Pietro called out, his voice tight with worry. "Boss, are you all right?" Carmine didn't answer. He turned and walked toward the corner of the room, his steps heavy as if wading through mud. Then he stopped in front of the concrete wall. And he punched it. His fist slammed into the wall with all the force in his body. Skin split open. Blood splattered across the gray surface. But Carmine didn't feel pain. He punched again, and again, and again. Each blow came with a guttural sound torn from deep in his throat. The sound of a wounded animal, of a man shattering from the inside out. Pietro stood up but didn't dare come closer. He had never seen Carmine like this. The Mafia boss who was always cold, always controlled, always the steel wall nothing could penetrate. But now that wall was collapsing. Carmine finally stopped. He stood there with his forehead pressed to the wall, both hands hanging at his sides, slick with blood. His shoulders shook. Not from cold, but from sobs being forced back, struggling to escape. "She didn't tell me," Carmine whispered, his voice breaking apart. "She knew and she didn't tell me. Rosalie, she was carrying my child." Then the memories came rushing back. The final weeks before Rosalie disappeared, she had been more tired than usual. She had refused wine at dinner. She had rested her hand on her stomach when she thought no one was watching. He hadn't noticed. He had been too busy with work, with wars in the underworld, with enemies that needed to be destroyed. He hadn't seen the most important thing right in front of him. "She was going to tell me," Carmine went on, sounding as if he were speaking to himself. "She was waiting for the right moment. Maybe our anniversary. Maybe my birthday. She loved surprises like that." He lifted his head and looked at the smear of his own blood on the wall. "And they took that from her. They took my child from her." Pietro swallowed hard. "Boss, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say." Carmine slowly turned around. His face was wet, but the gray in his eyes was no longer pain. It burned with a fire Pietro had never seen before. Colder than ice, hotter than hell. The fire of a man with nothing left to lose. "Find Facility Delta," Carmine said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Find it for me right now, and prepare the largest force we have. I'm not just coming to save my wife. I'm coming to burn everything down." 2 days later, Pietro had worked without rest to decode the coordinates of Facility Delta. In the end, he found it, an underground complex buried deep in the Catskills Forest in upstate New York, about a 3-hour drive north of the city. On the map, the location was registered as a biomedical research center owned by a pharmaceutical company that didn't exist. Satellite images showed a small cluster of buildings in the woods, seemingly harmless. But Pietro discovered that the power consumption there matched that of a mid-sized hospital. Something far larger was hidden beneath the ground. Carmine mobilized 20 men, the most loyal warriors of the Ferraro family. All were equipped with body armor, rifles, and night vision goggles. Bruno was still weak, but insisted on going along. Carmine didn't object. He understood that there were battles a man had to be present for, regardless of the wounds he carried. The convoy left Long Island at midnight. 3 black SUVs and 2 troop transport trucks moved through the darkness without headlights, relying only on night vision equipment and GPS. They reached the edge of the forest at 3 in the morning. From there, they went on foot. The Catskills in March were still bitterly cold. Melting snow turned the ground beneath their boots into thick mud. The team advanced in absolute silence, broken only by breathing and snapping branches. 20 minutes later, they saw the target. A small compound sat in a clearing in the forest. 2 guards patrolled outside, rifles slung over their shoulders. the bored expressions of men who believed no one knew this place existed. They were wrong. Carmine signaled. 2 silent crossbow bolts flew. The guards dropped without a sound. The team entered the building and found the entrance to the underground level concealed behind an industrial refrigerator in the kitchen. A concrete staircase descended deep into the earth. The air changed with every step down, colder, damper, and there was a smell. Disinfectant mixed with something else. The smell of fear, the smell of despair, the smell of death. The stairs ended at a heavy steel door. Pietro had provided the access code hacked from Sentinel's data. Carmine entered it and the door slid open. What lay beyond made even the hardest men stop breathing. A long corridor stretched ahead, lined on both sides with glass-walled rooms. Inside each room was a hospital bed, and on each bed lay a human being. They were motionless, eyes closed, bodies connected to dozens of tubes and machines. There were women, there were men, there were even children, no older than 12. All were so emaciated that their ribs pressed visibly against their skin. All had shaved heads, as if they had endured chemotherapy countless times. Some rooms were empty, not because no one belonged there, but because the person inside had died and been taken away. Dried blood still stained the mattresses. "My God," one of Carmine's men whispered, his voice trembling. "What is this place?" "Hell," Bruno answered hoarsely. "This is hell." Carmine walked down the corridor, his eyes scanning every room. He was looking for Rosalie. He was afraid to find her. He was afraid not to find her. Both fears were crushing him from the inside. They moved into another section, where the rooms were replaced by larger glass chambers. Inside each chamber was a woman, standing or sitting, eyes wide open and staring into nothingness. They wore thin hospital gowns, no shoes, no socks. Some were crying silently. Some muttered meaningless words. Some simply stood there, like breathing corpses. An electronic panel outside each chamber displayed information. Subject 092, Phase 3 bone marrow harvesting. Subject 115, Phase 2 plasma filtration. Subject 131, Phase 4 organ transplantation. Awaiting client. Nausea surged up Carmine's throat. They were raising these people like livestock, harvesting them piece by piece until there was nothing left to take. Suddenly, Pietro spoke through the headset, his voice urgent. "Boss, I've just accessed the internal system of the facility. Rosalie is in Sector D, Room 12, end of the left corridor. Hurry. Signals show movement heading toward your position." Carmine didn't need to hear more. He sprinted down the left corridor, leaving the team behind. Bruno shouted after him, but he didn't stop. His legs carried him faster than he had ever run. His heart hammered as if it would burst from his chest. Room 10, Room 11, Room 12. He stopped in front of the glass wall, and the world stopped turning. Rosalie was there, lying on a stark white hospital bed. So thin he almost didn't recognize her. Her auburn hair had been shaved away, leaving only a fine layer of fuzz on her scalp. Her arms were connected to 4 different IV lines. Her eyes were closed, but her chest was still rising and falling. She was alive. Carmine stood before the glass wall, his entire body frozen in place. 12 months, 365 days, 8,760 hours. He had lived inside his own private hell, believing she was dead, believing he would never see that face again. And now she was here, right in front of him, alive. He found the control panel beside the door and pressed the release. The glass slid aside with a soft hiss. The smell of disinfectant and sickness rushed at him. Carmine stepped inside, each step slow, as if moving too fast might cause her to vanish like a dream. He stood beside the bed and looked down at Rosalie. She was so thin that her cheekbones stood out sharply. The lips that had once been full and pink were now cracked and pale. The skin that had once been smooth like porcelain was gray and mottled with bruises and needle marks. Her left arm lay outside the blanket, and Carmine saw the familiar scar running from elbow to wrist. The rose tattoo covering it faded from months without light. He dropped to his knees beside the bed and lifted a hand to her cheek. Her skin was cold, but there was breath. There was a heartbeat. There was life. "Rosalie," he whispered, his voice breaking. "My love. It's me. I'm here." There was no response. She remained still, eyelids sealed shut. Carmine took her hand, small and fragile, The hand that had once worn his wedding ring, now gone. He lifted it to his lips and kissed it. "Rosalie," he whispered again, his voice trembling. "Please, open your eyes. Look at me." And then, like a miracle, her eyelids fluttered. Slowly, painfully slowly, her green eyes opened, the eyes Carmine had looked into 1,000 times and never tired of. The eyes he thought he would never see again. At first, her gaze was unfocused, as if staring through him into nothing. Then, gradually, awareness returned, her eyes fixed on his face, and Carmine saw the exact moment she recognized him. Her lips moved. Her voice was so faint he had to lean closer to hear it. "Carmine, I'm here," he said, tears streaming down his face without any attempt to stop them. "I came to take you home." Tears spilled from the corners of Rosalie's eyes, sliding into her hair and soaking the pillow. She tried to say something, but her voice was too weak. Carmine leaned closer. "I knew you would come," she whispered. I never stopped believing. Carmine couldn't hold back anymore. He bent down and pressed his lips to her forehead, staying there for a long moment. He felt her shallow breath against his neck, felt her tears seep into his skin. 12 months of loneliness, 12 months of pain, 12 months of hell. All of it ended in this moment. "Forgive me," Carmine whispered, his lips still against her skin. "I should have protected you. I should have found you sooner. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Rosalie lifted a weak hand and touched his cheek. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything. There was nothing to forgive. He had come. That was all that mattered. Suddenly, alarms tore through the fragile peace. Red lights flashed along the corridor. Bruno's voice came through the headset, tense and urgent. "Boss, they know we're here. Shaw's men are flooding in from the main and secondary entrances. At least 30 of them. We're surrounded." Carmine lifted his head, the familiar cold returning to his gray eyes. He gently placed Rosalie's hand back on the bed and stood. "Hold your position," he said into the headset. "I'm taking her out." "Boss, you can't." Bruno started to protest. "That's an order," Carmine cut in. Then he turned back to Rosalie. She was watching him, fear in her eyes, though her body was too weak to move. "I'm getting you out of here," he said, his voice absolute. "Even if I have to kill every last one of them." He slid one arm beneath her back and the other beneath her knees, lifting her from the bed. She was terrifyingly light, as if her body were little more than skin over bone. Rosalie wrapped her arms around his neck, her head resting against his chest. "I trust you," she whispered. Carmine held his wife close and stepped out of the room. At the end of the corridor, gunfire began to erupt. Gunfire thundered through the underground corridors like a storm with no escape. Carmine held Rosalie tight in his arms, his back pressed to the wall, moving fast toward his team. Bruno and 6 others had formed a defensive wall at a corridor junction, rifles spitting fire at the dark shapes pouring in from the main entrance. "Boss, the main exit is blocked," Bruno shouted over the gunfire. "They outnumber us 2 to 1. Pietro, is there another way?" Carmine roared into the headset. Pietro's voice came back, tense but focused. "There's an industrial drainage system running beneath the facility. The entrance is at the end of Corridor C, through a steel door marked Maintenance. It leads to a stream about 800 meters east of here." "Copy that. Everyone fall back to Corridor C," Carmine ordered. "Bruno, cover the rear." The team began to move in a controlled retreat, one by one pulling back toward the corridor leading to Section C, while maintaining suppressive fire. Carmine ran at the front, Rosalie still in his arms, her head resting against his chest. Her eyes closed. They rounded a corner, and Carmine stopped short. Blocking the path to Corridor C stood Angelo Ricci, the underboss in charge of Queens, one of the most trusted men in the Ferraro family. He was holding a gun, but it wasn't aimed at the enemy. It was aimed at Carmine. "Angelo," Carmine said, his voice ice cold. "What the hell are you doing?" Angelo smiled, the same smile Carmine had trusted for 10 years. "Sorry, boss, but Shaw pays better. $5 million. Enough for me to disappear and start a new life somewhere no one knows me." Carmine felt his blood boil, but his voice remained terrifyingly calm. "You sold my wife to Shaw. You gave him her schedule that night. I only told them when she'd be going out to sea and how thin her security would be." Angelo shrugged. "The rest was their problem. Don't blame me, boss. If anyone's to blame, it's you for trusting people too much." Rosalie stirred in Carmine's arms. She had heard everything. He felt her body tremble, whether from fear or rage, he didn't know. Bruno and the others caught up, stopping behind Carmine. They saw Angelo and understood instantly. Rifles came up, aimed at the traitor. "Don't do anything stupid," Angelo said with a thin smile. "I didn't come alone." From behind him, 6 of Shaw's men stepped forward, guns leveled at Carmine's team. They were caught in a crossfire. Angelo tilted his head. "Hand her over, boss. Shaw wants her alive. As for you, you can die fast or die slow. Your choice." Carmine stared at Angelo, his gray eyes unblinking. "You know what I hate most, Angelo." "What's that?" "Traitors." Carmine turned sideways, shielding Rosalie with his body. At the same moment, Bruno and the team opened fire. The corridor turned into hell in an instant. Bullets flew like rain. Screams echoed. Blood splashed against the walls. In the chaos, Carmine set Rosalie down behind a toppled medical cabinet, then charged Angelo. The traitor managed to fire a shot, the bullet grazing Carmine's shoulder, tearing fabric and carving a line of blood across his skin. But Carmine didn't stop. He slammed into Angelo, knocking the gun from his hand, and they crashed to the floor together. They grappled amid the deafening gunfire. Angelo tried to reach for a weapon, but Carmine was faster. He pinned him down, both hands clamping around the traitor's throat. "You took my wife," Carmine roared, his voice like a wounded animal. "You took my child. You took 12 months of her life." Angelo's eyes bulged, his face turning purple from lack of air. He clawed, punched, struggled. Carmine didn't let go. He tightened his grip, tighter, until Angelo's body stopped fighting, until his eyes went empty, until the traitor was nothing but a corpse. Carmine stood, breathing hard. Around him, the fight was over. 6 of Shaw's men lay motionless on the floor. His team had lost 2 men, 3 others were wounded, but they could still move. "Boss, we have to go," Bruno shouted. "More are coming." Carmine went back for Rosalie. She was staring at Angelo's body, her face unreadable. Then she looked up at Carmine and gave a small nod. No words were needed. She understood. In this world, betrayal had only one price. They ran toward the end of the corridor and found the steel door marked maintenance. Bruno kicked it open, and a rush of damp air poured out. Below was a concrete tunnel with dark water flowing slowly through it, the industrial drainage system. They jumped down one by one. The water was freezing, rising to their knees. Carmine held Rosalie higher to keep her dry. They moved forward into the darkness, guided only by flashlight beams. Behind them, the shouts and gunfire faded away. 800 meters through an underground hell. But at the end of the tunnel, moonlight was waiting. They emerged from the tunnel just as dawn began to break. A narrow stream cut through the forest, its clear water reflecting the soft orange-pink light of the rising sun. The extraction team was already waiting with an ambulance and 2 SUVs. Rosalie was placed on a stretcher and taken into the ambulance immediately. The Ferraro family's private doctor began examining her condition, while the convoy sped toward a safe house in New Jersey. Carmine sat beside his wife, holding her hand tightly, never taking his eyes off her pale face for even a second. They reached the safe house after 2 hours on the road. It was a secluded wooden lodge buried deep in a pine forest near the Pennsylvania border, one of many hideouts the Ferraro family maintained for emergencies. Rosalie was taken into the master bedroom, where a hospital bed and medical equipment had already been prepared. The doctor administered fluids, antibiotics, and vitamins, then reported to Carmine that she was severely depleted, but had no permanent internal organ damage. "She will recover," the doctor said, "but it will take time. A lot of time." Carmine nodded and sat down in the chair beside the bed. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He simply stayed there, watching over his wife as if afraid that if he closed his eyes, she would disappear again. Rosalie slept for 12 hours. When she opened her eyes, night had already fallen outside the window. The soft yellow bedside lamp illuminated her face, highlighting features that were gaunt, yet still painfully beautiful. "Carmine," she called, her voice still weak but clearer than before. "I'm here," he said, leaning closer and tightening his grip on her hand. "What do you need?" "Water. Food." Rosalie shook her head slightly. "I need to tell you something. About our child." Carmine went rigid. He had read the file. He knew she had been pregnant when she was taken. He knew they had ended the pregnancy. He had mourned that unborn child in the basement of the estate. He thought he was prepared for anything. But what Rosalie said next shattered everything he believed he knew. Our child didn't die, Carmine. He stared at her, unsure he had heard correctly. What? The records are lies, Rosalie said, tears beginning to spill down her cheeks. They didn't kill our baby. They took her out when I was 4 months along. They had technology, an artificial incubator. They grew her outside my body. She survived. She's a girl. Carmine felt as if all the air had been ripped from his lungs. The child he believed was dead. The child he had grieved was still alive. How do you know? He asked, his voice trembling. Because I heard her cry. Rosalie sobbed. They wouldn't let me see her, but the room wasn't far from mine. The night she was born, I heard her cry. Her first cry. I will never forget that sound. It was the most beautiful and the most painful sound I have ever heard. Her body shook as she struggled to contain her sobs. Then they took her away. I begged them. I pleaded. I even offered my life instead of hers. But they didn't listen. They said she was too valuable. Her blood was like mine, rare and special. They said they had already found a buyer. Carmine stood up, unable to sit any longer. He turned his back to Rosalie, his fists clenched so tightly his nails cut into his palms. His body trembled, whether from rage or grief or both, he couldn't tell. His daughter was somewhere out there, alone, with strangers, not knowing who her parents were. Do you know who they sold her to? He asked, forcing control into his voice. I overheard a conversation, Rosalie said. They mentioned a name. Whitmore, a senator. His sister couldn't have children, and he bought our daughter as a gift. Carmine turned back to his wife. A fire burned in his eyes that she had never seen before. Not anger, not hatred, but resolve. Pure and absolute resolve. I will find her, he said, his voice firm like a vow. Even if I have to tear Washington apart. Even if I have to stand against the entire United States government. I will bring our daughter home. Rosalie looked at him, tears still falling, but for the first time there was a spark of hope in her eyes. I know, she whispered. That's why I survived every day in that hell, because I knew you would come, and I knew you wouldn't stop until our family was whole again. The days that followed passed slowly inside the safe house. Rosalie gradually regained strength and was able to sit up and eat light meals. Color began to return to her hollow cheeks, though she was still pale. Teresa was brought in from Long Island along with Ethan, because the main estate was no longer safe after the breach at Facility Delta. Shaw would certainly know by now, and retaliation was inevitable. One afternoon, as autumn sunlight streamed through the bedroom window, Rosalie began to tell Carmine about the 12 months she had spent in hell. She spoke in a steady voice, as if recounting someone else's story, because that was the only way she could say it without breaking apart. They didn't let me sleep for the first 3 days, she said, her eyes fixed on the window. They wanted to break my will. The lights were on 24 hours a day. Loud music never stopped. They asked me about you, about the Ferraro Empire, about secrets I didn't even know. Every time I said I didn't know, they did something to hurt me. Carmine sat motionless, his hand gripping the edge of the bed until his knuckles turned white. He wanted to scream, to destroy everything, but he knew that what Rosalie needed now was for him to listen. She needed to speak. She needed to release the memories poisoning her from the inside. When they found out I was pregnant, everything changed. Rosalie went on. They stopped the torture. They started feeding me properly, giving me supplements, not because they cared about me, but because they cared about what was inside me. I was just a container for what they wanted. Tears slid down her cheeks, but her voice didn't shake. 4 months. They let me carry the pregnancy for 4 months, and then they took me into surgery. I begged them not to do it. I said I'd do anything, but Dr. Cross, that man with the crazed eyes, just smiled and told me to count backward from 10. I didn't want to count. I fought, but the anesthesia was too strong, and when I woke up, my body was empty. Carmine wrapped his arms around his wife and pulled her against his chest. She cried without sound, her body trembling in his embrace. He said nothing. There were no words for this kind of pain. All he could do was hold her and let her know she was no longer alone. After they took our baby, they started harvesting me, Rosalie said when her sobbing eased. Blood, bone marrow, stem cells. Every few weeks they took me back into surgery. I don't know how much they took from my body. I only know that every time I woke up, I was a little weaker. I started to forget the days, forget what the sun looked like, forget the sound of birds, There were moments when I even forgot you." She looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "And that was the most terrifying part. Because you were the only thing keeping me sane. Every night I repeated your name like a prayer. Carmine Ferraro. Carmine Ferraro. I told myself you would come. I told myself that if I could just survive one more day, just one more day, you would find me." Carmine kissed her forehead, her tear-soaked eyelids, her cracked lips. "I came," he whispered, "and I'll never let anyone touch you again." A soft knock interrupted the private moment. The door opened slightly, and Teresa appeared, with a thin boy standing beside her, messy brown hair, small hand gripping the edge of Teresa's sleeve, brown eyes watching Rosalie with a mix of curiosity and worry. Rosalie looked at the boy, then at Carmine with a questioning gaze. "This is Ethan," Carmine said. "The one who found you." Rosalie's eyes widened. She looked at the boy as if he were a miracle, the boy from the cemetery. The boy with the handkerchief. The boy who didn't give up when the world refused to believe. "Come here," she said gently, lifting her hand. Ethan hesitated for a second, then stepped away from Teresa and approached the bed. He stood there, unsure of what to do. Rosalie reached out and touched his cheek. His skin was warm, his eyes were clear, and in them, she saw a reflection of herself 15 years earlier. A child left behind. A child no one believed. A child who survived anyway. "Thank you," she whispered, tears spilling again. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for saving me." Ethan looked at her and then did something he hadn't done with anyone since his mother died. He leaned forward and wrapped his arms around Rosalie. She held him tightly, as if he were the child she had lost. Carmine watched his wife hold the orphaned boy, and inside him, amid all the pain and fury and hunger for revenge, something soft began to grow. Hope. For a family. For a future. For what could still be rebuilt from the ashes. 3 days after Rosalie and Ethan's conversation, Pietro called from the safe bunker where he was hiding, his voice so excited it nearly shouted through the phone. "I found her, boss. Your daughter." Carmine was sitting beside Rosalie's bed, and at those words both of them stopped breathing. He switched the call to speaker so Rosalie could hear. "Go on, Pietro." "I dug deep into Senator Harold Whitmore's financial records. He has a sister named Margaret Whitmore, 43 years old, living in Greenwich, Connecticut. She's married to an investment banker but couldn't have children due to a medical condition. They tried in vitro fertilization 5 times, all failed. Then suddenly, last July, they had a newborn baby girl. The birth certificate lists her as an international adoption from Romania. But when I checked immigration records, no child from Romania entered the United States matching that timeline." Rosalie squeezed Carmine's hand so hard her nails cut into his skin, but he didn't feel the pain. "Continue." "I hacked into the child's medical records. Blood type AB negative. Boss. Exactly the same as Rosalie. And there's one more detail. The baby has a light brown birthmark on the back of her neck shaped like a maple leaf." Rosalie broke down crying. "That birthmark," she said through sobs. "I saw it on the ultrasound at 12 weeks. The doctor said it was harmless. I was going to name her Autumn because of that leaf shape." "That is your daughter's child," Pietro said firmly. "There's no doubt. They removed her from Facility Delta 2 weeks after she was born in the artificial incubator and sold her to the Whitmore family for $2 million. I have Margaret Whitmore's home address in Greenwich. Send it to me now," Carmine said, his voice frighteningly calm. "It's sent. But boss, there's a problem. Harold Whitmore has deep connections in Washington. He's the chairman of the Senate Homeland Security Subcommittee. He could have the FBI at his sister's house within an hour if you move against her. I'll handle it." Carmine ended the call and turned to Rosalie. She was looking at him with tear-filled eyes blazing with determination. "You'll bring her home," she said. "I trust you." At that moment, an explosion shook the entire house. Windows shattered. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Bruno kicked open the bedroom door, blood running from a cut on his forehead. "Shaw is attacking," Bruno shouted. "At least 20 men. They've surrounded the house. How did they find us?" "Pietro had a mole in his system," Carmine said grimly. "He realized someone traced his phone signal and backtracked our location. There's no time. Get Rosalie out of here," Carmine said, pulling a gun from beneath the pillow. "What about your mother and the boy?" Bruno asked. "I'll get them. You take care of my wife." "No, Carmine. Rosalie grabbed his hand. I'm not leaving without you. Rosalie, there's no time to argue. I'm not leaving, she repeated, her voice hard as steel. I lost you once. I won't lose you again. Carmine looked at her, then gave a curt nod. Bruno, take Rosalie through the escape tunnel behind the kitchen. Wait for me there. If I'm not there in 10 minutes, you drive away. Don't come back. Boss. That's an order. Carmine didn't wait for a reply. He ran out of the room toward the east wing where Teresa and Ethan were staying. Around him, the world was collapsing. Walls cracked under gunfire. Flames began to rise in one corner of the living room. His men were fighting and dying on every side. He shot down 2 of Shaw's soldiers on the way without slowing. When he reached Teresa's room, the door had already been kicked in. Inside, Teresa stood in front of Ethan, a handgun in her grip that she had kept hidden under her pillow for 50 years. 2 of Shaw's men lay sprawled on the floor. She had once been the wife of a Mafia don. She knew how to protect herself. Mom, Carmine called. Let's go, son, Teresa said, taking Ethan's hand. Don't worry about me. Worry about your wife and my grandchild. They ran through the burning hallway, dodging bullets, stepping over bodies. Carmine led, Teresa and Ethan close behind. When they reached the kitchen, Bruno was already waiting with Rosalie in his arms. The group rushed down the stairs into the escape tunnel. Above them, the house was burning fiercely. They ran through the darkness of the tunnel, guided only by Bruno's flashlight. 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. Then they saw light at the end of the tunnel. A van was waiting, engine roaring. They jumped inside and sped off into the night. Through the rear window, Carmine watched the safe house swallowed by flames. Another refuge lost, but his family was still here. All of them alive. And Shaw had made a fatal mistake. He had made it personal. Now this was no longer just about saving Rosalie or finding their child. Now, this was war. 2 days after the attack on the safe house, the Ferraro family went into hiding in a Manhattan penthouse owned by a shell company that even Pietro hadn't known existed until Carmine revealed it. It was the final contingency plan Carmine's father had left behind, a refuge no one in the organization knew about except the head of the family. Rosalie had recovered enough to walk on her own, though she was still weak. Teresa took care of her and Ethan while Carmine prepared his next move. He couldn't attack Margaret Whitmore's home in Greenwich directly. Doing so would bring the FBI down on him within hours. He needed another approach. He needed to face Harold Whitmore himself. Pietro had uncovered the senator's schedule. That night, Whitmore would attend a re-election fundraising gala at the Willard Intercontinental Hotel in Washington, D.C. $500 a ticket. Carmine bought 10. He arrived alone, wearing a perfectly tailored black 3-piece suit, his hair slicked back, his expression calm, indistinguishable from a successful businessman supporting a politician he admired. No one recognized that the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast was standing among donors and lawmakers. Carmine observed Whitmore from a distance for the first hour. The senator was 63, obese, balding, with a fake smile glued to his face all evening. He shook hands, laughed at every joke, nodded at every compliment. A typical politician. A typical hypocrite. When Whitmore slipped away from the crowd toward the VIP restroom, Carmine followed. The lavish restroom of marble and gold-plated fixtures was empty except for the 2 of them. Whitmore was washing his hands when he saw Carmine in the mirror. He frowned for a second, trying to place the face. Then recognition struck. The blood drained from his face. "Ferraro," Whitmore whispered, his voice trembling. "You know who I am," Carmine said, stepping closer. "Good. Then we don't need introductions. I've got security right outside," the senator said, trying to steady himself. "I know. 2 men, by the column on the left side of the main hall. But they're not in here, are they?" Whitmore swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "My daughter," Carmine said flatly. "Your sister has a child. That child is mine. She was stolen from my wife and sold illegally. I want her back." Whitmore's face paled, but he quickly masked it. "I don't know what you're talking about. My sister's child is a legal international adoption. We both know that's a lie." Carmine stepped closer until he was less than a meter away. "You have 2 choices. 1, you convince your sister to return my daughter quietly. No police, no courts, no scandal. You keep your Senate seat. Your sister keeps her reputation. And I get my daughter back. Or," Whitmore asked tensely, or I destroy everything you have. Your career, your family, your life. I'll drag into the light every dirty deal you made with Frederick Shaw, every bribe you took, every victim you helped him bury. And when you've got nothing left to lose, I'll take my daughter another way." Whitmore stood still for a moment, then suddenly laughed, a dry, contemptuous sound echoing off the marble. "You think you can threaten me?" Whitmore said, confidence returning. "What are you? A New York gangster. I'm a United States Senator. I've got the FBI, CIA, NSA in my pocket. Touch my sister and I'll have the entire federal machine crush you. Your family will be prosecuted, your assets seized. You'll die in prison." Carmine didn't move. His face remained calm, as if he were listening to a weather forecast. "You think I'm afraid of prison?" he asked softly. "You think I'm afraid of death? Senator Whitmore, you took my daughter. You worked with the man who tortured my wife for a year. There's nothing left you can do to scare me." Carmine leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But you should be afraid of me, because I don't play by your rules. I don't need courts to judge. I don't need police to enforce. I am my own law, and I've just declared war on you." Carmine stepped back and adjusted the lapel of his suit. "You have 48 hours to think. After that, everything will spiral out of control for both of us." He turned and walked toward the door. "You'll regret tonight, Ferraro," Whitmore snarled behind him. "You've got no idea who you're dealing with." Carmine paused at the threshold without turning around. "Neither do you, Senator. Neither do you." Then he walked out, melted back into the crowd, and vanished into the Washington night. 48 hours. The clock had started counting down, and the war had officially begun. 48 hours passed. Whitmore didn't make contact. Carmine wasn't surprised. Men like Whitmore always believe they're untouchable until their world collapses. On the third night after the meeting in Washington, Carmine launched his assault. Not an attack, but a storm. He'd spent the past 2 days mobilizing every resource the Ferraro family possessed, reaching out to allies in Philadelphia and Boston, and planning every detail down to the minute. At 11 p.m., everything began at once. In New York, a 12-man team hit Sentinel Securities' warehouse in the Hunts Point industrial district of the Bronx, where Shaw stored weapons, vehicles, and cash. They wiped out the guards within 7 minutes, seized $3 million in cash, and burned the rest to the ground. In New Jersey, Bruno led a 20-man unit against Shaw's logistics headquarters in Newark, the coordination hub for transporting victims, complete with records, trucks, and communications gear. Bruno left nothing usable behind. The building burned like a massive torch in the night, flames visible from 5 miles away. In Pennsylvania, an allied team from Philadelphia attacked one of Shaw's secret research facilities near Scranton, smaller than Facility Delta but still active, holding 14 captive victims. The team rescued them all, moved them to a secure hospital, then destroyed the site. Within 3 hours, Shaw's empire lay in ruins. But that was only the first phase. The second belonged to Pietro. The hacker had been working non-stop since stealing the Sentinel data, decrypting everything, organizing it into clear files, and preparing a package capable of destroying not only Shaw, but his entire protection network. At 2 a.m., Pietro hit send. Thousands of emails went out simultaneously to the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, Fox News, the BBC, the FBI, the Department of Justice, every Senate and House office, and every media outlet and law enforcement agency Pietro could think of. The contents included thousands of pages of documentation, victim lists with names, photos, and fates, transaction records showing who bought people and for how much, evidence of illegal medical experiments, security footage from inside the facilities, and most damning of all, proof of Senator Harold Whitmore's involvement, the money he'd taken from Shaw, the calls he'd made to shield illegal operations, and the forged adoption papers for his sister's child. Before dawn, America woke to shock. The news spread like wildfire. Every network ran the same story. A massive human trafficking ring exposed. A United States senator implicated in crimes against humanity. Hundreds of victims. Some dead, others still missing. Social media exploded with hashtags, "Justice for the victims," "Whitmore is over," "Shut down Sentinel." Millions shared, commented, demanded accountability. Spontaneous protests erupted outside the Capitol. Whitmore tried to deny everything at a hastily arranged morning press conference, sweat pouring down his forehead as he called it fake news and a conspiracy by dark forces trying to destroy him. No one believed him. The evidence was too clear, too detailed, too undeniable. By noon, the FBI announced a formal investigation. By afternoon, Whitmore was summoned to testify before the Senate Ethics Committee. By evening, his sister Margaret Whitmore was placed under Connecticut Child Services supervision, while authorities investigated the origins of her adopted child. Carmine watched the news from the penthouse, Rosalie beside him, her hand gripping his. "They're falling apart," she whispered. "Yes," he replied, "but Shaw hasn't been caught yet, and our daughter still isn't home." Carmine's phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. He opened it and read, "You wanted war. You've got war, but I've still got one last card. Meet me at the old warehouse at the Port of Newark tomorrow at midnight. Alone. Bring whatever you want. But if you want to see your daughter alive, don't bring the police. Shaw." Carmine stared at the screen, jaw clenched tight. Shaw was cornered, and cornered men were the most dangerous of all. But Shaw had just made the biggest mistake of his life. He'd told Carmine exactly where he would be. Midnight. The Port of Newark lay shrouded in darkness and fog rolling off the Hudson River. The old warehouse sat at the far end of the pier, a red brick structure abandoned since the 1980s. Windows shattered, the roof pocked with holes, weeds choking the base of its walls. Carmine arrived alone as Shaw demanded, but he wasn't foolish. Bruno and an 8-man team were already hidden in the darkness 200 meters away, waiting for his signal. Pietro tracked everything through satellite feeds and the port's security cameras he'd hacked. Rosalie stayed behind at the penthouse with Teresa and Ethan. Safe, or at least that was what Carmine believed. He shoved the rusted steel door open and stepped inside. The warehouse interior was pitch black except for a single pool of light at its center cast by an industrial bulb dangling from the ceiling. Beneath that light stood Frederick Shaw. The former colonel looked nothing like the images Carmine had seen. Thinner, older, his silver beard ragged instead of neatly trimmed. The icy blue eyes now carried the madness of a man who'd lost everything. His prosthetic arm caught the light, cold metal reflecting without emotion, just like him. But what made Carmine stop short wasn't Shaw. It was what Shaw held in his remaining arm, a baby. A little girl about 10 months old, wrapped in a white blanket, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger surrounding her. Sparse hair the same reddish-brown as Rosalie's. Carmine felt his heart miss a beat. His daughter, the child he'd never seen, the child he'd believed lost forever. In the hands of his enemy. "You came?" Shaw said calmly, as if they were meeting in a cafe. "Right on time. I've always admired Italian punctuality." "Put her down," Carmine said, his voice shaking as he fought to control his rage. "Not yet." Shaw glanced down at the baby and smiled. "She's beautiful, isn't she? She has her mother's eyes. I saw her open them once on the way here. Green like emeralds. You have a lovely daughter, Ferraro. It'd be a shame if something happened to her." Carmine took a step forward, but Shaw raised his prosthetic arm, and Carmine saw what he held. A small grenade, the pin already pulled. "Don't be stupid," Shaw said evenly. "I let go. We all die. You, me, and this little princess. What do you want?" Carmine asked through clenched teeth. "You destroyed everything I had," Shaw said, his smile vanishing. "The empire I built over 10 years reduced to ashes in one night. Whitmore was arrested this morning. Dr. Cross killed himself in his cell. My facilities are shut down. My accounts are frozen. I have nothing left, Ferraro. Nothing but this grenade and the child in my arms." "So why are you here?" Carmine asked. "To end it." Shaw locked eyes with him. "I'm a soldier. I know when I'm beaten, but I also know how to drag my enemy down to hell with me. You took everything from me. Now I want to see if you can live without the thing you love most." He tightened his hold on the baby, and she began to cry. A thin, fragile sound echoing through the empty warehouse. Carmine felt his blood boil. He wanted to rush forward, to tear Shaw apart with his bare hands, but he couldn't. The grenade, the baby. Everything was in the hands of a madman. "Put her down," Carmine said, forcing his voice to stay steady. "If you want to kill me, do it. But let her go. She's innocent." Shaw laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Innocent. You think anyone is innocent in this world. The children I sold, the women I experimented on, they were innocent too. Did that stop anyone? This world has no place for innocence, Ferraro. Only the strong and the weak. Predators and prey. Suddenly another voice cut through the darkness behind Shaw. So what are you now, Shaw? The strong or the weak? Shaw turned, and Carmine followed his gaze, disbelief flooding him. Rosalie stepped out of the shadows. She wore black, her short hair damp with sweat against her pale forehead. In her hand was a pistol aimed straight at Shaw's head. She was still weak. Carmine could see the slight tremor in her arm, but her green eyes didn't shake. They burned with a fire he'd never seen before. The fire of a mother protecting her child. You can't shoot, Shaw said, but his confidence had cracked. I've got the grenade. You shoot me. I let go. We all die. Rosalie moved closer, the gun never wavering. You think I'm afraid of dying? She asked, her voice colder than ice. I've tasted death for 12 months. You took my child from my body. You turned me into a living corpse. Dying now, beside my daughter and my husband, would be a gift compared to what you did to me. She stopped 3 steps away from him. But I'm not dying tonight, and neither are you. You're going to live. You're going to live to face justice. You're going to live to rot in prison. You're going to live so that every night, alone in your cell, you remember the faces of every person you destroyed. Put my child down. This is the last time I'll say it. Shaw looked at Rosalie, then at the gun in her hand, then back at the baby crying in his arms. And for a brief moment, Carmine saw hesitation in his enemy's eyes, the calculation of a soldier weighing his options, but Shaw had forgotten one thing. He was facing a mother, and nothing was more dangerous than a mother protecting her child. Rosalie fired. The first shot hit Shaw's prosthetic arm at the joint near his shoulder, metal and polymer exploding apart as the arm dropped to the floor along with the grenade. Carmine surged forward like an arrow, snatched up the grenade, and hurled it through the shattered window behind them. The explosion boomed outside, shaking the entire warehouse, but no one was hurt. Shaw staggered from the loss of his prosthetic arm, yet his real arm still clutched the baby, and he tried to retreat, trying to use the child as a shield, but Rosalie didn't stop. She stepped closer, gun raised, eyes never leaving Shaw for even a second. The second shot slammed into Shaw's right knee. He screamed and collapsed, but the instinct of a soldier made him hold on to the baby instead of releasing her to break his fall. Carmine was already there. He tore the baby from Shaw's grasp before the man could react. The child wailed, sharp and frightened, but she was safe, cradled in her father's arms where she belonged. Shaw lay on the cold concrete, blood pouring from his knee, his face twisted in pain. Yet he laughed, a mad sound echoing through the warehouse. You think you've won? He spat, blood mixing with saliva. You understand nothing. I was only part of a system. Kill me and someone else will take my place. Cut off one head and 2 more grow back. Rosalie stood over him, looking down at the man who had destroyed her life. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The third shot struck Shaw square in the chest, directly over his heart. His icy blue eyes widened in a moment of disbelief, as if he couldn't accept that she had truly done it, and then the light in them faded. His body jerked once and went still. Frederick Shaw, former United States Army colonel and architect of a brutal human trafficking network, died on the cold concrete floor of an abandoned warehouse, without glory, without ceremony, with nothing but blood and darkness to mark his end. Rosalie stood there, the gun still in her hand, her body shaking from exhaustion and emotion. Then she turned to Carmine and the baby in his arms, and she broke. Carmine stepped forward, holding his daughter with one arm and pulling Rosalie into him with the other. The 3 of them standing together in the dark warehouse amid the smell of gunpowder and blood, beyond the reach of anything else. They had found each other. Their family was whole. The baby stopped crying, as if sensing the warmth of her parents' embrace, opened her eyes, green like her mother's, and looked up at Carmine's face. And then she smiled, a tiny, innocent smile that knew nothing of the darkness around her. Carmine felt tears streaming down his cheeks. Carmine Ferraro, the Mafia boss who never cried, crying like a child. And he felt no shame, because these weren't tears of weakness. They were tears of release. Hope, Rosalie whispered, gazing at their daughter. Her name is Hope. I decided the moment I saw the maple leaf birthmark. She is my autumn. She is our hope. Hope, Carmine repeated, tasting the name. Hope. Perfect. Bruno and the team stormed in minutes later, but everything was already over. They found Shaw's body, cleared the scene, and escorted the Ferraro family out of the warehouse. On the drive back, Carmine called Pietro. "It's done," he said. "Shaw is dead. My daughter is safe." "I know, boss," Pietro replied, his voice full of relief. "I was watching through the cameras. There's more. Whitmore has just been officially arrested. The FBI is raiding his sister's house. Dr. Cross hanged himself in his cell last night. Shaw's entire system is collapsing." "Good," Carmine said, looking at Rosalie holding Hope as she slept peacefully in her arms. "We'll handle the rest later. Right now, I'm taking my family home." The SUV glided through the empty streets of Newark toward Manhattan, and in the east the sky was turning shades of pink and orange with the coming dawn. A new day was beginning, and for the first time in 12 months, Carmine Ferraro could look ahead without fear. Justice isn't perfect. It doesn't always come from courts or police. Sometimes it comes from 3 bullets fired by a mother who survived hell, but it is still justice, and sometimes it is the only kind that truly matters. 6 months later, autumn had settled over Long Island, turning the rows of oak trees along the road leading to the Ferraro estate a deep shade of gold. And although the mansion had been rebuilt after the attack, it wasn't just walls and roof tiles that had been replaced. The entire house seemed infused with a different soul, with children's laughter drifting from the back garden where Ethan was running across the lawn, a paper airplane in his hand, making engine noises. The 10-year-old boy utterly changed from the thin, rain-soaked child who'd stood outside the cemetery a year earlier, his cheeks now flushed with health, his brown eyes no longer guarded and prematurely old, but sparkling with the joy of a child who was loved. On the porch, Rosalie sat on the swing with Hope in her arms, the 16-month-old girl playing with her mother's reddish-brown hair, giggling softly now and then. Rosalie nearly fully recovered, her hair grown back to her shoulders, her skin warm with color again, and her smile returned to lips once cracked by suffering. Carmine stood at the window of his study, looking out at the garden, still running the Ferraro empire, but slowly shifting toward more legitimate ventures like real estate, restaurants, and hotels, because he didn't want his daughter and son to grow up in the shadows the way he had. He wanted a different future for them. Today was special. On Carmine's desk lay a set of documents, just finalized. Adoption papers. Ethan Ferraro. No longer Ethan with no family. No longer the orphan surviving behind dumpsters at the Brooklyn docks. Now a boy with a name, a family, a place to belong. Carmine stepped onto the porch and sat beside Rosalie, handing her the papers, and as she read them and looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, she whispered that it was official now, that Ethan was their son, and Carmine nodded before calling Ethan over, the boy running up, flushed from play, still clutching his paper airplane, as Carmine asked if he knew what day it was. Ethan shaking his head in curiosity, and Carmine telling him that today was the day he officially became a Ferraro, that from now on he was their son, Hope's big brother, Teresa's grandson, a part of this family forever. Ethan stared at the papers, then at Carmine, then at Rosalie, his lips trembling as he asked if it was really true, and Rosalie answered him with the very words he'd once said at the cemetery a year before, that it was as real as standing there, and Ethan threw his arms around them, crying silently, the cry of a child who had finally found home after wandering in darkness for 3 years and stepping into the light at last. Teresa came out from inside the house, her eyes wet as well, wrapping Ethan in her arms and kissing his forehead, calling him her grandson and telling him she would teach him how to cook the family pasta, a Ferraro tradition. They all sat together on the porch, watching the sunset bathe the garden in gold, Hope asleep in Rosalie's arms, Ethan sitting beside Carmine, daring for the first time to rest his head on his adoptive father's shoulder, while Teresa told stories from Carmine's youth that made the boy laugh. This was family, not perfect, not ordinary, but theirs, built from pain, bound by love, protected by blood and tears. Yet somewhere in the shadows, a man sat alone in a dark office, staring at a photograph of the Ferraro family on his computer screen, taken from a distance with a telephoto lens, showing them on the porch, happy and at peace, unaware they were being watched. As he spoke into a phone, saying Shaw had failed because he was greedy and too personal, that he wouldn't make those mistakes, ordering the surveillance to continue and to wait for the right moment, then ending the call and studying the image again with eyes cold as ice, because the war wasn't over. It was only beginning, but that was a story for another day. And for now the Ferraro family deserved to enjoy this rare moment of peace, having fought, endured, and lost so much. This story reminds us that family isn't always about blood. that sometimes family is made of those who find each other in the storm, who choose to stay when the world turns away, that Ethan, a forgotten orphan, became the bearer of hope for an entire family, that Rosalie, a woman dragged into hell, rose stronger than ever, and that Carmine, a man born to the shadows, learned to love the light, because that is the power of belief, the power of love, and the power of never giving up. And if this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel to hear more moving stories each day. Like and share this video with those you love, and tell us how this story made you feel, what it reminded you of in real life, whether you've met children like Ethan who were abandoned yet resilient, or women like Rosalie who endured and overcame. Leave a comment below to share what's in your heart, because every story matters to us, and we wish you and your family strength, joy, and peace every day. Thank you for being with us. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.